Misafirler, oturumumuzu başlatabiliriz. Editörlük ve hakem değerlendirme süreçleri ile ilgili oturumumuzu başlatacağız. Bu arada belki ilk 5 dakika simultane tercümeyi duyamayabilirsiniz. Fakat tercüme sonrasında gerçekleşecek. Teknik bir aksaklık yok. Sadece tercümanımız yolda bir trafik kazası geçirmiş ve şu anda taksideymiş. 5-10 dakika içerisinde burada olacak. Arabayı hemen birilerine teslim etmesi gerektiğinden dolayı taksiye binmek üzere olduğunu söylemiş arkadaşlarımız biraz önce ilettiler. Bu sırada ben James TESTA ve Matthew Hayes ile ilgili sizlere kısa bir bilgi vereceğim. Valla doğruya doğru, hani size de diyebilirdik ki işte tercümanımız şu anda şöyle olmuş böyle olmuş, hiç eğri büğrü yanlış bir şey söylemeye gerek yok. Son dakika bilgisi hemen paylaşalım. Bir 5 dakika ben zaten sevgili misafirlerimizin de sizlere bilgilerini aktaracağım. Bu süre içerisinde de bir 2 dakika geçse belki birkaç dakikasını, ki o sırada da zaten hepimizin az çok algılayacak İngilizcesi vardır diye tahmin ediyorum. Çünkü gelecekler, oturacaklar falan. Ben de bu arada doldurmaya devam ediyorum efendim. Fark ettiyseniz bu 5 dakikayı. Bilmiyorum, aklıma başka bir şey gelirse tanıtırken söyleyeceğim. Bu 5 dakikayı muhtemelen doldururuz. Editörlük ve hakem değerlendirme süreçleri konu başlığımız. Çok önemli iki isim. İlk olarak James TESTA kimdir? Sizlere kısa bilgi vermek istiyorum. 1983'te Clarivate Analytics'e katıldı. 1983'ten 1996'ya kadar yayıncı ilişkileri bölümünü yönetti ve dergileri Clarivate Analytics tarafından endekslenen 3000'in üzerinde uluslararası akademik yayıncı ile çalışma ilişkileri kurmaktan ve sürdürmekten doğrudan sorumluydu. 1996 yılında çeşitli Clarivate Analytics ürünlerinde yer almak üzere dergilerin ve diğer yayın biçimlerinin değerlendirilmesi ve seçiminde bilgi profesyonellerinden oluşan bir grupta editör geliştirme direktörü olarak görev yaptı. 2007 yılında baş yönetmen, editoryal geliştirme ve yayın evi ilişkileri direktörü olarak görev yapmaya başladı. 2009'da bu pozisyon başkan yardımcısı olarak yeniden sınıflandırıldı. Bu birleşik rolde Clarivate ürünleri için içerik oluşturmaya devam etti ve uluslararası STM yayın topluluğuyla iletişimde verimliliği artırmak için çalıştı. Amerikan Bilgi Bilimi ve Teknolojileri Derneği üyesidir, ASIST ve Asya Pasifik Bölgesi, Güney Amerika ve Avrupa'daki Clarivate Analytics adına sık sık seminerler veren bir isimdir kendisi. Şubat 2013'te Sayın TESTA, Başkan Yardımcısı Emeritus Editoryal Geliştirme ve Yayın Evi İlişkileri rolünü üstlenmiştir. Bu görevinde Clarivate'i Uluslararası Bilimsel Araştırmalar Dergisi seçme sürecine destek veren Uluslararası Bilimsel Yayıncılık Topluluğu'na, bilim dünyasının dünyaca bilinen yüksek kaliteli içeriğinin sorgulanmasına, korunmasına ve geliştirilmesine vurgu yaparak hala çalışmalarına devam ediyor. İlk olarak alkışlarınızla James TESTA'yı ben sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Evet, sanırım alkışlar biraz... Hoş geldiniz. Welcome Mr. TESTA.
Thank you. Can you first of all, if you want, somewhat? The other is, you know, the middle.
Evet, kendisini ben oturmak üzere davet ettim. Çünkü Matthew Hayes'i de davet edeceğim. Sonrasında konuşma başlayacak ve Matthew Hayes'le de ilgili birkaç cümle söylemek istiyorum. Dünyanın en büyük hakem değerlendirme platformu ve Web of Science grubunun bir parçası olan Publons'ta yayıncı ve fonlama geliştirme direktörü. Taylor and Francis ve Springer Nature'ın eski direktörlerinden olan Hayes, The Institute of Education and Global Citizenship Education'da yarı zamanlı bir doktora araştırmacısı ve alkışlarınızla Matthew Hayes geliyor. Evet, Matthew Hayes de sahnedeki yerini alırken, welcome Mr. Hayes. Evet, kendisi de yerini alırken, İlk olarak ben sözü Sayın TESTA'ya bırakıyorum. Yes, first of all, Mr. TESTA. Yes, we can start. Evet, söz kendilerinde. Bir alkışlayalım lütfen. Bir kez daha onları alkışlayalım. Çok değerli misafirler çünkü.
presentation.
Arkadaşlar, Mr. Tester'ın sunumunu açabilir miyiz lütfen? Ya da buradan mı açıyoruz acaba? Ekranda mı acaba şu anda? Evet, buradaymış Ms. Reis. Evet, bu arada tercüman içinde zaman kazanmış oluyoruz efendim.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your kind introduction. And before I begin my formal remarks, I just want to tell you about my experience in attending conferences like this. When I am out on the street in Philadelphia, in Ankara, in Istanbul, I am a fairly ordinary person. No one notices me. I go about my business. But when I come here, suddenly everyone wants to come and speak to me and talk to me, and I am the honored guest, and so on. And I am wise enough at this point in my life to understand that it is not Jim Testa himself, but the aura of Web of Science that draws the crowd to me. And I hear so much about, please accept my journal, please look at my journal, as though I were the person, as though I had any influence over possibly accepting your journal into the Web of Science just because we've met. I have no influence. The entire process is run by the editorial development group, and their integrity is absolute. I cannot influence them. They are subject, as I am, and as anyone who approaches Web of Science, to our journal selection process, which has been in place and applied consistently for nearly 60 years now. And it is a model for many other citation databases around the world, because we are trying to build journals. We're trying to evaluate journals that have the basic fundamental criteria for participating in this electronic environment. So as I go through the process, I want you to understand that what we're trying to do is give you some guidelines to help you be more effective and efficient in the production and communication of your scholarly research. And the second thing that I want to say, and that has become very clear to me today, especially after speaking personally with Professor Atalar and listening to him again here, is that the Web of Science, even though it is owned by, or created, let's say, by Clarivate Analytics, I don't believe that we really own it. The data that is in Web of Science belongs to you, and it is reflective of your work. And as such, I think that it is time now, considering the possibility in this electronic environment and with open access and the importance of the impact factor, for us to work together to assure that the integrity of the scholarly enterprise is absolutely impeccable. And we can do what we can to present you with data that is accurate. I can say with absolute certainty that the impact factor today is more accurate than it has ever been. But are the data that we have collected, are they presented with integrity? Are they in the journal because they really reflect the nature of the research that is being discussed in the article, or are they there for some other reason? This kind of work, I think, can only be done in collaboration with organizations like TÜBİTAK and ULAKBİM. organizations that sit above the commercial aspects of publishing and that wish more to advance the research of a particular country. So these are my main takeaways and what I'm going to discuss with the leaders of Clarivate when I return. This index, the Web of Science, has global importance. It is our business, but it is also the lifeblood of scholarly research, and we want together to do everything that we can to make sure that the publishing and the scholarly publishing enterprise and research itself is conducted with the utmost integrity, and that should be reflected in the data that we collect. So, let's start with a little background. The Web of Science Core Collection is guided by the legacy of Dr. Eugene Garfield. I began working with Dr. Garfield in 1983, and one of the things that he insisted upon was 100% accuracy in the processing of data. He understood that coverage could be limited to a small number, relatively small number of high-impact journals. But when it comes to processing the data, we absolutely must have 100% quality. And we have been adapting to respond to the technological advances and changes in the publishing landscape from the beginning. A citation index would only be possible when we have computer technology. And the computer technology was just beginning to emerge in the 1950s when Dr. Garfield began his enterprise. The basic principles of our selection process remain the same: objectivity, selectivity, and collection dynamics. I wrote an essay describing the process in 1996 when I started working with editorial development. And that essay became the most popular item on our website. My entire writing and everything that I've said about the selection process is based on what Dr. Garfield taught me. And now we are expressing it in a rather more detailed way, based on Garfield, based on what I said, and in a way that is rather more granular than it has been before, and we hope more clear. So, again, our evaluation process and the curation of the collection helps make the Web of Science Core Collection the most authoritative global citation database. So, Dr. Garfield began in 1955 publishing this article in Science. And you can find this article online, and I encourage you to read it. But one of the main points that he made even in the opening lines of this article were to use citation indexing in order to eliminate the possibility of fraud in publishing. So if an article were citing works erroneously, or if the work itself were not adequately reflected in the cited references, now everyone could see that. This was one of his main concerns. He also wanted to find a way to put a current source into its proper context in the literature. This had been done previously by subject indexing, but now, by capturing the cited references, we could see the true context for the subject under discussion. This is a history of the Web of Science, beginning in 1964, when Garfield introduced the first science citation index, and he developed the impact factor in 1965, primarily as a way to select journals for the Science Citation Index. And in those days, his goal was to capture the most highly cited, most high-impact journals, because he believed that a small number of journals could account for the majority of influential and important research. And in a group of maybe 1,000 journals, we would have the journals that published the most and that had the highest impact factor and the highest overall citation rate. In 1975, the impact factor and the journal citation reports became part of the Science Citation Index. And then moving forward to 1997, we had a revolution when the Web of Science went online. Before that, we had the Science Citation Index on CD-ROM, which was in itself a huge step forward. Everyone became an expert searcher first time out. But in 1997, when we launched the Web of Science, it really has began and continues to have a huge effect on the way that the literature is viewed, analyzed, and processed. So the Web of Science core collection is comprised of a number of high-quality indexes. In the center here, we have what we call the Web of Science core collection. And it is composed of, let's begin with the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which is an entry point for many journals. When a journal is selected for the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which in Turkey we refer to as ESCI, it needs to have the highest quality production and editorial quality. Citation impact is not necessarily a factor for entry into Emerging Sources Citation Index. The content needs to be of the highest quality, and all ethical practices need to be followed. If you're successful in entering into SG, it's possible after a couple of years to be evaluated for flagship products like Science Citation Index Expanded, the Social Sciences Citation Index, and the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. Complementing these 4 journal indexes are the Book Citation Index and the Conference Proceeding Index. We also have patent and data collections, the Derwent Innovations Index and the Data Citation Index, and some specialty collections, current contents, biosis, and zoological record. And most importantly for Turkey is the regional hosted content, the Chinese citation database, the Russian Science Citation Index, the Korean Citation Index, and Cielo, the Brazilian Citation Index, which covers all of South America and South Africa. And then there are specialty collections that we host, like food sciences and technology abstracts, CABI, etc. All of these can be searched individually or together. So here, this is just a view of the core collection. In the center are the 3 journal citation indexes, Science Citation Index Expanded, Social Sciences and Arts and Humanities, with SG, ESCI on the outside, and complemented by Conference Proceedings and Book Citation Index. So this allows search and discovery of a trusted set of titles with comprehensive coverage in terms of subject, region, and medium. Many of the journals in SG are regional journals, journals that are not targeting an international audience, but rather have as their target audience a regional, national, or even local audience.
Evet hanımlar beyler, bu arada simultane tercümanımız gelmiştir. Siz de kulaklıklarınızı takıp tercümeyi dinleyebilirsiniz. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you. Thank you. So here in the center of the core, again, is the SCI, the SSCI, and the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. And for the Science Citation Index and the Social Sciences Citation Index, where journal-to-journal citations are more common, we calculate impact factors. For the Arts and Humanities Citation Index, we're looking for significant content in the arts and humanities, but we do not calculate impact factor for arts and humanities because arts and humanities literature very characteristically does not cite other journals. It cites many other kinds of literature, books, works of art, theater pieces, music, whatever it might be. So impact factor is meaningful for science and for social science, but not so much for arts and humanities. And here we have a view of how the process might work. On the left, we see that the evaluation begins by a journal submitting for evaluation. I'll show you at the end of the presentation how to do that, the websites to go to. And for SCIE, SSCI, and Arts and Humanities Citation Index, we evaluate for quality and for impact criteria. But for emerging sources, for books and for conference proceedings, we're looking for quality publications. And as you can see, if a journal is accepted for SG, it may, at the beginning, not have a significant impact. But if it gains impact, we can evaluate it again and bring it up into the one of the three flagship indexes. Conversely, if a journal is covered in SCIE or SSCI especially and loses impact, it may come back down into ESCI. If any of these journals lose quality, and by quality I mean are they failing to produce issues? Have we detected unethical publishing practices? When that happens, the journal is removed from the index. The Web of Science core collection provides breadth and depth of coverage, allowing comprehensive discovery within a curated data set that can be trusted. So the role of SG in the Web of Science core collection for publishers is significant. It improves the visibility and provides detailed understanding of your journal's citation performance. SG is a citation index, and we capture all the citations to the journal and from the journal. Not only do we collect them, but we tell you where they have come from, whether they have come from Web of Science itself, from one of the regional indexes, or from one of our specialty citation indexes. For authors, likewise, it gives the author a chance to have their work more discoverable and citable. And for researchers as well, you're able to identify trends and developments beyond the high-impact literature. The Emerging Sources Citation Index, I think, is particularly valuable in bibliometric and scientometric studies, measuring output alongside of impact. So this slide shows the distribution of Emerging Sources Citation Index coverage over the globe. And I want to draw your attention to Middle East and North Africa, where we've added 328 journals. And Africa itself, more than 100 journals from many countries that were never represented at all. So the reach of SG is global, and I think it gives us a more comprehensive view of what is happening in scholarly research worldwide, making bibliometric and scientometric studies more effective. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I have no direct influence over the selection of any journal. It is in the hands of our editorial development group, who have no affiliation to any publishing house or research institute. They have no potential bias or conflict of interest. All they do is evaluate journals and apply the journal selection process to the journals that come to them. They see every journal in their field. So they have a unique position in the community as experts of literature in very specific fields. The editors are assigned to categories that are based on the current contents categories that Dr. Garfield began with in the 1950s. And they include clinical medicine, agriculture, biology, and environmental sciences, engineering, technology, and computation, physics and chemistry and earth science, social and behavioral sciences, arts and humanities, and life sciences. There are 9 editors who are surrounded by a team of maybe 10 more support staff. So they are experts in the literature of their field, and they see every new title. So we use a single set of 28 criteria to evaluate journals. 24 of these criteria are quality criteria designed to select for editorial rigor and best practice at the journal level. And the final 4 are impact criteria designed to select the most influential journals in their respective fields, using citation activity as a primary indicator of impact. Journals that meet the quality criteria, as I said, may enter ESG in the Web of Science collection. Journals that meet the additional impact criteria may enter SCIE, the Social Sciences Citation Index, or the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. So these are dynamic collections subject to continuous curation. To ensure that journals are in the appropriate collection. Every time we select a new journal, it is compared against existing coverage. So the journals that are in the collection are constantly being reviewed by the editor. And if we find a new journal has a superior quality of content or is more higher impact, then it's possible for it to replace a journal that is presently covered. And as I said, if SG journals gain impact, they may move into the Science Citation Index, the Social Sciences Index, or the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. Okay, so this is the editorial workflow. And what we see here are the 28 criteria that we use to evaluate all journals, beginning with an initial triage, which simply helps us identify the journal. ISSN, clear journal title, an identifiable publisher, and so forth. And then we have the editorial triage. Is the journal scholarly? Are the article titles and abstracts in English? The bibliographic information for Web of Science must be in English, and the cited references must be in the Roman alphabet. Clarity of language is of particular importance in both English and in the non-English language. And I encourage you to do whatever you can to ensure that the quality of your translation and your original text is the highest. And so on. Author and editorial affiliation details. This means let's be sure that we have all the authors clearly identified by their research address as well as the editorial board members. If these 2 initial triages are passed successfully, then we can go on to the editorial evaluation. If they are unsuccessful, then we simply inform you of the problem. You can fix the problem and then come back to us when everything is okay. Next, we have the editorial criteria. We're going to look at the editorial board composition and make sure that it reflects the content of the journal, the validity of your peer review and ethics statements. Is the journal peer-reviewed? The relevance of the content itself to the scope statement. Grant support information. If your research is grant supported, make sure that you include information about that in the journal article. And adherence to community standards. In other words, if you're publishing in surgery, for example, what is the average number of articles that a surgery journal publishes? Let's see that your journal publishes at least that many. And we're finding that overall disciplines, that somewhere between 15 and 20 articles a year is minimum. Author distribution. If you are targeting an international audience, we expect to see an internationally diverse group of authors. If it's a regional journal, then regional authors are acceptable. And appropriate citations to the literature. Is the journal really citing the literature appropriately? So if it passes all of these criteria, it can enter ESCI. And then finally, if its goal is to be in the SCIE or the SSCI, we look at the impact criteria, which include citations at the journal level, at the author level, the editorial board members, and for arts and humanities, content significance. Is the subject of this arts and humanities journals unique? We're not looking for a journal that just discusses art in general at this point. We're looking for a journal that discusses a particular topic in the arts and humanities rather specifically, perhaps in a particular era, in a particular country, and a particular medium. Okay. So initial triage performed using information provided by the publisher. And the principal purpose of the initial triage step is to ensure unambiguous identification of the journal submitted for evaluation. If the journal has obtained an ISSN, the ISSN committee generally agrees that this title is unique. To ensure that we have full-text access to content. If, at the time of submission, we do not have full-text access, we cannot continue with the evaluation. So be sure when you submit your journal for evaluation that all of the passwords and whatever protocols are necessary for access are given to us. We want to be sure that the journal is rigorously peer-reviewed and to have contact information if we have any questions about the journal. And this means that the journal publisher must have a physical address, not just a post office box. So if we don't have any of this information, then we can't proceed with the evaluation. So again, there's no embargo for failure to meet this initial triage. We just give you some information about what is missing, and you make the correction and then resubmit the journal immediately. So this initial triage, as I said, minimum criteria required at the time of submission. ISSN, clear journal title, identified journal publisher, URL for the online journal, access to the content, presence of a peer review policy, and contact details. If this initial triage is unsuccessful, the journal does not go forward, and it can be resubmitted as soon as the problems are solved. If it is successful, then we can go on to editorial triage. So in this step, The Web of Science editors review the journal to determine whether a full editorial evaluation is merited. First and foremost, the journal must contain a substantial amount of scholarly content. More than 50% of the content needs to be scholarly articles, well-referenced, peer-reviewed. English language and must be present for all bibliographic elements: title, abstract, keywords. Roman script is required for author names and addresses, and for all cited references. Clear and comprehensible language, absolutely essential. And the volume of the journal, the amount of content the journal is able to publish, will demonstrate to us an interest of the subject to the intended research community. The authors and editorial board members must be identified with their research address. So there is no embargo if the editorial triage is not completed successfully. We can simply tell you what's wrong, and then when it's, the damage is repaired, we can redo the editorial triage. So this is what it looks like step by step. It's an assessment of publication quality. Is the content scholarly? Are the article titles in English? Yes, and in this case you see at the top a German abstract followed by an English abstract below. The bibliographic information must be in the Roman script. Clarity of language is absolutely essential. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but trust me, this is very, very unclear. English language translation might have been done. I can't tell you how this was done, but this would be an obstacle to coverage. So be sure that if you're engaging in translation into English, that it is of the highest quality that you can manage. Timeliness and/or publication volume. The journal must be publishing on time according to its stated frequency, and minimally 15 to 20 articles a year. Website functionality must be present. We need to be able to navigate the website easily. Ethics statements must be in place. You must declare that peer review is taking place and that you're operating with the highest ethical standards. And of course, editorial affiliation details addresses of editorial board members as well as authors. Okay. So if this is unsuccessful, there is really no embargo. We simply ask you to correct whatever is wrong, and then you can resubmit the journal immediately. If it is successful, then we can go on to the editorial evaluation. Okay. And this is the evaluation for quality. In this step, the Web of Science editors are checking for alignment between the journal's title, stated scope, the composition of its editorial board, and its published content. They are looking for evidence of editorial rigor and adherence to community standards. Journal characteristics subject to evaluation include whether the journal publishes content consistent with the journal's title and scope. What is the scope statement, and do the articles reflect that scope? Oop. Sorry about that. Okay. The editorial board needs to be comprehensive and to cover all the subjects that are included in the scope of the journal. Peer review must be declared and be robust. the authors must demonstrate characteristics that validate their participation in the relevant scholarly community. In other words, their research affiliation must reflect the scope of the journal. So, is the surrounding literature cited appropriately? If the journal does not pass this step, resubmission is subject to an embargo of at least 2 years. So again, this is what the process looks like. Editorial assessment for publication quality begins, and we're looking for editorial board composition, validity of statements, peer review. Peer review statements must be shown. As we see here, the journal was received on the 24th, revised on November 16th, and then accepted on November 18th. And here again, this is the example of funding research given. If your article is funded, be sure to include the funding information in the metadata for the article. And adherence to community standards in terms of volume. Author distribution reflecting the content of the journal, and appropriate citations to the literature. So here, I want to go back. Page up. Yeah. Here we see an example of how self-citations work in the literature. We've seen that 85% of journals in SCIE and SSCI have a self-citation rate of equal to or less than 15%. And then there's another 15% that are outside that range. Excessive self-citation weakens the integrity of the journal's impact factor. Journals with excessive self-citation may be suppressed from journal citation reports until the problem is corrected. It is not possible to sustain a practice of self-citation for any length of time because our editors see all of the data, and when they see a problem with self-citation, they take action by suppressing the journal, and in some cases by dropping the journal from coverage. It's also quite common that if a journal is practicing, instructing its authors to self-cite, that someone from the community will contact us and tell us that this is happening, because the importance of the impact factor is such that the members of the scholarly community want it to have the highest integrity. So we are frequently informed of a problem with self-citation. If the editorial evaluation is unsuccessful, there is an embargo of 2 years. Okay. If it is successful, then the journal may enter the Emerging Sources Citation Index, and it can be evaluated for impact. Before I go on to that, I want to talk a little bit about unethical citation behavior. Here we see the World Journal of Gastroenterology. It's a Chinese journal that in 1999 began to self-cite to an alarming degree. Its impact factor went from a fairly modest impact factor to close to 3, which was rather remarkable for a Chinese gastroenterology journal. And when we looked at the data underlying the impact factor, we saw that 95% of the citations were self-citations. So in this graph, the green represents the impact factor with self-citations, and the purple line represents the impact factor without self-citations. So when this was discovered, we dropped the journal from coverage for 2 years, and then in 2007, we began coverage again. We had some very serious discussions with the publishers, and as you can see, the journal began to build impact with self-citations being they were not in any way a significant influence on the impact factor. And ironically, when we come to 2017, we see that the legitimate impact factor of this journal, without, in the absence of this self-citation cheating, is equivalent to what it was in 2002 when they were cheating. So by simply working with integrity, they were able to achieve their goal legitimately. And here, an even more alarming problem came with the journal Bone Research, which I believe comes from Nature Publishing Group. So this can happen anywhere. And what happened was that the editor of Bone Research had some affiliation with nanoscience and nanotechnology letters and the Journal of Bio-Based Material. And he made a deal with those journals to cite his journal. The subject matter here is not related to bone research, but when we looked at the data, this is simply the cited journal listing for bone research, we could see that a remarkable number of citations from these unrelated journals went to the impact factor years. So we suppress this impact factor because it has no meaning. And again, in this case, someone informed us that this was going on, and we went and looked, and that was the result. So, evaluating for impact, these criteria are designed to select for the most impactful journals in a given field of research, using citation activity as a primary indication of impact. Citation analysis is conducted at the journal level. How many total citations has the journal achieved in its career, and also journal impact. In other words, how many citations to the current work in the current year have been made to articles published in the previous 2 years. So current citation impact and total citations are viewed. We look at citations at the author level to see that the journal can attract journal authors who are making significant contribution to the literature in the past. Also at the editorial board level. So we're also, especially for arts and humanities, we want to be sure that the content of the journal is important and has value to the intended readership and to Web of Science subscribers. This is particularly important in arts and humanities journals. It's in the sciences and the social sciences, again, we do not need a general journal on chemistry. We need a journal on some very specific current topic in chemistry that is going to complement everything that we've been covering. So, uniqueness of content, novelty of content, all of these things are important. And so the question that we have is there an audience for this journal? We don't need to have another generalized journal in practically any topic, but is there an audience for this particular area of investigation in whatever the subject area might be? And because the editors who are doing the evaluation are experts in the literature of their field, they can spot these emerging trends. Okay, so here it is, graphed out. Publication impact, comparative citation analysis at the journal level, the author level, the editorial board level, and testing for the significance of the content. If the citation analysis is unsuccessful, then there is an embargo of 2 years. If it is successful, then the journal can be entered into the SCIE, the SSCI, or the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. Okay. How to cite your journal. It's extremely important that you give examples of how to cite each article in your journal so that citations will not be incorrect or inaccurate in any way. We have ways of unifying inexact citations, but it's better if they are perfectly formatted to begin with. So be sure to include information on how to cite the journal with each article. So just some recent changes in policy. We're accepting print journals for SG. It's possible to be covered in BIOSIS as well as in SG. The number of categories for an SG journal is now in line with what we do for the other indexes in Web of Science. There can be as many as 6 categories. And the relationship between the Web of Science core collection and the journal citation reports, there is no separate evaluation process for the journal citation reports. An impact factor is based on data that is found in the Web of Science. If you are covered in the Science Citation Index or the Social Sciences Citation Index, we can see the output and we can see the extent to which that output has been cited in the literature. And the impact factor is developed therefrom. Okay? Journals must be accepted into the SCIE or SSCI before the 31st of December to be included in the following year's JCR release. Citations for the impact factor come from all books, journals, and conference proceedings indexed within the Web of Science. All of these publication types contribute to the impact factor. So, and again, only journals that are contained within the JCR are assigned a journal impact factor. So, this is kind of an abstract of an article that was published by Dr. Mabel Chu and Dr. Villanuevo in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. And they interviewed the editors of some very high-impact general and internal medicine journals and asked them, how do they maintain their impact? How do they grow an impact and maintain it? And some of the journals that were interviewed were the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, and the Canadian Medical Journal. And the first thing was their enrollment of more internationally high-impact researchers in the journal editorial board. So try and attract members of the community who you know have done significant work in the past and who are willing to contribute something to the journal. Then the second thing is the active recruitment of high-impact articles by courting researchers. The next thing is article selection. Of course, when the journal is added to the Web of Science, SG or one of the flagship indexes, you're flooded with papers. Do not succumb to the temptation of growing the volume of the journal. Select the best articles and from this larger group that you have to choose from. And of course, boosting the journal's media profile. Oh, I skipped the fourth one, which is most important. Better services offered to authors. In other words, let's have an efficient peer review system, not keeping the author waiting for a year. Let's do it efficiently with a very robust system and turn around the peer review as quickly as possible. And of course, boosting the journal's media profile. So when you have a hot article, make sure that you are getting it in front of the researchers who you know are going to want to see it and use it. So finally, I'm going to show you the Web of Science editorial hub. These are some of the links that you use to submit your journal, your book, your conference proceedings. You can ask for evaluation status and so forth. If the journal is, something is changing with the journal, you can contact us about that. So all of these links will help you to communicate with Clarivate about the life of your journal as it exists in Web of Science. So finally, I want to give you a quotation from one of my colleagues, Marie McVeigh. She and I worked together for many years to build up the integrity of the journal citation reports. We can vouch for the accuracy of the metrics, where they came from, and their validity is another matter, and that, as I said at the beginning, is something that we expect you to be overseeing. And in the future, I think that the only way that we're going to coexist with the impact factor is to work together to make sure that ethical practices are adhered to. So Marie just was writing me an email on some subject, and she wrote this remarkable paragraph. She said, how do we capture, represent, and promote the good science, that incredible national investment and massive commitment towards science and technology, while ensuring that it has been executed and communicated with an equal commitment to ethics and good practice? I think this is really at the heart of the matter. This is the question that we all need to be asking, and I hope that moving forward that we can develop some answers to it together. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I have a really tricky slot because you must be absolutely starving. So I'm only going to take half an hour. My name is Matthew Hayes from Publons. Thank you for your very kind introduction earlier. And it's quite hard to follow Jim there with an incredible presentation. So I'm going to focus on just peer review and talk to you a little bit about that. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Publons, just to set Publons into context so you know a little bit about who we are and why peer review is so important to us. Then we're going to look at the question of predatory journals, because I know that's something that's on everyone's mind, and I'm going to show you ways that Publons can help you identify predatory journals and understand more about the practices of journals that are out there globally. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we mean by an international high-quality journal and the steps that we can take on that journey to get there. And then if we have time, I'm going to share with you some findings from some reports that we've recently done into the global state of publication peer review, which I hope will be interesting, and there's some very intriguing statistics there about Turkey as well. So an introduction first to Publons. Our mission, very simply, is to accelerate research using the power of peer review. We started on the belief that peer review is undervalued and also insufficiently transparent. And we really wanted to turn peer review into a rewarding activity and putting it out there in the public domain. The way that we do this is we have a community of researchers on the Publons website that can use their individual Publons profiles to track all aspects of their research contribution. So we began with peer review, but we've expanded into publications, editorial board memberships, and grant peer review. And that's helping us to showcase the value of a researcher's peer review contribution and how it adds to their standing as a researcher and to the profile of their university and their country. We have found along the way that providing researchers recognition for their peer review has helped them in conversations with their supervisors, with their deans, in their career progression, because it's one example of their progress towards being an esteemed researcher in their field. So we don't just have to look at publications and citations anymore. Where is Publons today? Well, we have just under 2 million researchers on our platform. We have just under 5 million reviews that have been added to our platform by researchers. We have partnerships with over 4,000 journals where we integrate our services directly into their submission systems so that we can source the data that we need to host that peer review content. And we partner with over 100 publishers. And I've given you some examples there below. And it really ranges from the largest publishers, multinationals such as Springer Nature and Taylor & Francis, right down to emerging university presses and journals in emerging research centers. And we've only been around for a few years, so we're obviously growing at quite a pace. At the moment, we add 1,000 new users a day. And increasingly, we're seeing this beyond North America and Europe, which is where we really began. So that's Publons, a bit of context about who we are. But I know that predatory journals is of interest to all of us, so I thought I would show how Publons can help you understand more about the issue of predatory journals. First of all, what sort of journals are on Publons? The answer is that any journal can have a presence on Publons. Any journal in the world. There is no curation, we are not an index. And this is because we believe that any researcher that does peer review anywhere in the world should be able to get recognition for that work. And I suppose an associated point is we believe in transparency as well. We want to have all this information out there. But of course that poses a challenge because there are, I think, some 80,000 plus journals globally. Jim's talked about how you can differentiate in an index. So you need some guidance in terms of determining quality and distinguishing amongst all these different journals. And we have a couple of ways of doing that. First of all, we partner with journals. As I mentioned, we integrate our services into their workflow. But in doing that, we also provide that badge of Publons association to a journal. And in doing that, we've given that journal our stamp of approval in terms of their processes. We have a number of checklists, a number of standards that we go through to ensure the journal is appropriate for that partnership. And I've listed some of them here. As I say, our objective is not to be an index, so we're not looking at impact. And where we do look at quality, we're very careful about how we measure it. We really want to encourage journals from emerging research centers and brand new journals that are just setting up their peer review processes. So we actively encourage those journals to partner with us. And in terms of our overall ambition, we just want to make sure that no predatory journal can use the stamp of Publons approval to gain legitimacy. So that's what we're looking out for. I've just given you an example there of some of the standards. We have about 20 questions that we go through. Members of our team assess a journal on that basis. The journal doesn't have to meet all of those standards to be a partner with us, but we look for a majority of them to be met. And all of this is available on our website, so do take a look, and of course, come and ask me for any questions afterwards. And at the end of the day, the aim is to provide that journal with that official partner badge on our website, which enables you to distinguish that journal from the very large volume that are on Publons. But there are other ways of looking at journal quality and this issue of predatory journals as well. As I mentioned, we have this community of 2 million researchers, so we encourage those researchers to provide their own community-driven endorsements of journals. So what is their perspective on the peer review process of a journal? How have they found working with the editorial board? And here is an example here. I'll show you how to navigate to this in a moment. But this is a journal page on Publons, and you can see an endorsed by section. This has a list of all the researchers that have decided they are comfortable to publicly associate themselves with this journal in terms of its quality. So that's a fantastic way of asking the community's help to understand where predatory journals possibly could be and where the highest quality journals are. So how can you navigate to that? Well, on Publons, we have a browsing table. You can browse on the basis of searching for an individual researcher if you want to look at their profile. You can also look at a country, look at your peer review metrics, and see how that compares to other nations. And then you can dive down into that and look at individual researchers and universities. But you can also look at journals. So I have an example here of a search term. The little green ticks that you can see, indicate that I've already decided to filter my search to only journals that allow the signing of peer reviews. Also, only those journals that allow the displaying of the peer review content itself, and also only those journals that are partners with Publons. But you can toggle that around. And that gives you a subset of that vast 75,000 plus journal landscape that's out there. You can then search for a journal or a publisher to see further information. And finally, you can sort this as well. So you can sort this by, are they partnered with Publons? That's a very good, immediate way of navigating through these journals. You know if they're partnered with us, we've already performed checks against them. How many verified reviews do they have on Publons? We verify every review that comes to us, to our database, to make sure it is a legitimate review and it's not a fraudulent or made up one. So if you can see a decent number of verified reviews, you know that that journal is operating a legitimate peer review process. And also you can look very easily at whether they've been endorsed by your peers. And then, as I showed you earlier, you can click on that journal and look into it in more detail. But this is a great way of giving you a very quick overview of legitimate and potentially illegitimate journals. I thought I'd put down here some questions that we encourage researchers to ask when they come to Publons and want to understand more about journals and those that may potentially be predatory. So we encourage them to use that filtering tool and that browsing tool to navigate to a journal page on Publons. This is the census journal, for example, and ask some questions as they look at that page. Does the publisher have reviews on Publons? We find a number of predatory publishers sometimes create or ask us to create a journal page on Publons, but they don't have a peer review process, so we're constantly vigilant for that. But that's also a very good way of checking for a predatory publisher if they've just set themselves up for that badge of credibility, but actually they don't really have the peer review process behind them. Are those peer reviews verified? Do they have any review content added? We have a number of journals that have hybrid peer review practices, so they may decide to publish some of the peer review content openly. And if they do that, that's a fantastic way for you to assess the quality of the journal, because you can see right there and there in the detail the quality of their peer review process and the editor's comments. Can you also identify the editors on Publons? Many of our users decide to claim the fact that they are an editor on a journal as a part of their profile, as a part of that badge of their contribution. So that's also a great way of looking at the quality of the journal. You can also reach out to the community. And finally, you can always reach out to us as well, and we're happy to investigate anything that we think is problematic. So I hope that helps in terms of predatory journals. The overall message from us is that we want peer review to be transparent. That doesn't necessarily mean that peer review content needs to be published, but it does mean that the process itself should be transparent. We should show that there are reviewers performing peer review. Ideally, we publish their names where we can to give them recognition, but we also want to put that information out there in the hands of the community, so the community has the control and the ability to navigate this quite thorny issue of predatory journals. So now I thought I would look at what we mean by an international high-quality journal, which I think are two concepts that come hand in hand and you often hear people talking about. We've looked at this a lot at Publons, and we think that there are broadly 5 main requirements for journals that want to be indexed by the major global indices. The first is rigorous peer review protocols, and Jim spoke a little bit about this earlier. The journal should consist of peer review content and have a publicly available description of the peer review process. I would lead with peer review, of course, but you can see how fundamental we think that is to a high-quality journal. The second is diversity in the geographical distribution of the journal's editors, peer reviewers, and authors, particularly in 2019 when research is so international. The third is high-quality peer-reviewed content, so readability of the content, clarity of the abstracts, and the overall quality of the articles that have been published. Sorry, my clicker takes a bit of time. The fourth is relevance for an international audience. And the fifth is efficient publishing processes with minimal delays. So I say those at the outset because I think what's interesting there is you see peer review is a common thread to all of those requirements. Of course, Jim went into a lot more detail, and the indices will themselves have many more criterion than that. But those we thought were broadly the 5 themes across the major indices, and you can see that peer review is a common thread running through all of them. And that's why we believe peer review is so important, and I encourage you to think about your peer review process, how you engage with your reviewers, how often you evaluate whether you are finding the best reviewers, whether you are recruiting international reviewers, and also that relationship between your reviewers and ultimately your future authors and readers and even editors. So in the remaining time, I thought I would tell you a little bit about what we've learned about peer review in the past few years, growing to the rate that we have, partnering with all these international journals, having conversations, encouraging our researchers to feedback to us. We have this thought leadership series called the Global State of Peer Review. And the idea there is that as the world's largest peer review platform, where we are partnering with journals and with funders and with publishers to bring reviewers and review content onto our platform, we really do believe we have a responsibility to provide back some of that data to the community and try to show the world at large what are the broad trends, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities ahead for all of us. So we regularly share these insights, and we pull them together in a variety of ways. We have 2 reports that we've published in the last 2 years. One was on publication peer review last year, freely available. The other on grant peer review. and we brought together individual survey responses from the researchers on our community, as well as insights in the editorial submission system that we partner with within the Web of Science group, Scholar One. Also publications and citations data from the Web of Science and Insights, and a range of interviews in addition to the data on Publons. And we found some really fascinating insights from this. So just to look at publication peer review. First of all, we looked at the issue of efficiency in the peer review process globally. Now this is a little complicated chart, so bear with me here. But let's start with the easier story on the right-hand side. In 2013, it took 1.9 reviewer invitations on average globally to secure one reviewer. In 2017, that figure had reached 2.4 invitations. And if the current trend continues, we estimate in the next few years, we'll see that figure rise to 3.5 review invitations. Now, those numbers in isolation don't mean anything, but when you think about being a very busy journal, and many of you are academics as well, with your own busy research life, how hard is it to find reviewers when you're getting more and more rejections out there? You're having to send out more and more invitations and find more and more relevant reviewers. And of course, an associated problem with that is that as the reviewers that you've initially identified as the most relevant reject your invitation, you then end up with those that are perhaps not best placed to review your article, and ultimately, maybe the quality of the articles that you're publishing can deteriorate. So we think this is a huge issue, and it's something that we do try to address at Publons by leveraging that global reviewer community. The other interesting part about efficiency is when you look at it at a national level. So what you have here is a chart of effectively submissions and reviews mapped against each other. Now on the I really need to focus on my glasses. On the left-hand side, you see the reviews that are submitted by every country. So the overall review contribution they are making to global research. And that is the green bar. And to the right of that, the white bar, is the submissions that are coming in from that country as well. So hopefully you can identify here pretty quickly some quite dramatic disparities. So you can see that what we would call the established research centers, such as the UK and the US, they tend to contribute slightly more reviews than submissions in some cases, in others substantially more, whereas in emerging research centers, you see the complete opposite. And just to pull out information on Turkey there, so you can see for Turkey, if you look at the white bar, that is the submissions that are coming in from Turkish researchers to global publishers, what we call the demand for reviews, and the green bar is the supply of reviews that are coming in. So there's a massive disparity there. And we'll come to the key takeaways later, but that's, of course, got nothing to do with the enthusiasm and interest of Turkish reviewers. It's more to do with ingrained biases amongst editors on international journals. And that's something that we believe we need to address at Publons to encourage journals to expand their scope internationally, look at editors beyond sort of narrow pools and try to expand into emerging research centers like Turkey, like China, to address some of this imbalance. And we think that is a potential solution to this challenge of reviewer acceptance rates dramatically declining and the challenge of finding reviewers. We also looked at quality. Now quality, to assess quality at scale is of course very difficult and it's a bit of a blunt instrument. What we did was looked at the average length of a review report as a proxy for quality. Now of course, and as researchers yourselves, you know that that is quite a dangerous instrument to use. It is quite, as I say, a blunt instrument. However, it is interesting to see from that the variances between again, those established research centres and the emerging ones. In established research centres, such as the UK, Europe, US, we find average peer review length of just over 500 words. In emerging research centres, it's around half of that. Now, we don't think that that is necessarily an indicator of quality, but it is interesting in terms of the perception of quality. And we think, again, there is some training to be done there in the community and amongst editors to encourage non-native speakers, and perhaps in some cases, to feel more comfortable about contributing a longer review, and equally to encourage editors to realize that it's not just about the length of the review, it's about the important takeaways and the guidance for the author. Third theme we looked at was transparency. I know we, earlier on, we talked a little bit about Plan S and about the open science movement in general, which I'm sure you're watching very keenly. Well, we think that transparency in peer review is going to be something that many people look at in the coming years. So we asked our reviewers what they felt about transparent peer review processes, the idea of opening up peer review. That could be by assigning their identity to a particular review report, or it could merely be publishing the review report and keeping their identity anonymous. What's interesting there is that overall a majority were against opening up peer review. However, when you broke it down generationally, we found that early career researchers, around 40% of them, were very supportive of the idea of opening up the peer review process, compared to 22% of more senior researchers. So we do see a generational shift happening, and I think also as more journals and publishers experiment with transparent peer review, I'm sure we will see more changes there as well, as we realize that it's not the frightening initiative that we think it is, and it can actually really build that trust and accountability in the peer review process. And then finally, looking at diversity. I think this really comes back to the point I was making around efficiency and the review submissions gap. But I think the overall message from this, and I will share these slides after, is that we are trying as much as we can to encourage international journals, wherever they may be, to expand the scope of their editors, their reviewers, their authors, to bring more diversity into the global publishing process. Because we did notice that editors disproportionately tend to select reviewers from within their own worldview, their own experiences, their own country, maybe even their own university and research community. And we think that that can exacerbate an insular view of research. So we want to encourage and open up the internationalization of research. And as I say, so what should we take away from all these findings? Well, I hope that these are quite practical insights for you to see. First of all, to appreciate that you're not alone in some of the challenges that you have. Hopefully, you identified with a lot of these and found that you have them in your own journals. But there are also some takeaways. The first is that there are ways we can diversify the reviewer pool. Reviewer training is something that Publons believes very strongly in. We have a free reviewer training tool called the Academy for researchers. And that's our way of trying to upskill researchers, whether they are non-native speakers or maybe just early career researchers, whether that's in the UK or in China. Incentive structures. So we looked a lot at why reviewers do review. And of course, the whole purpose of Publons is to try to make review a tangible contribution from the researcher, something that they can get real benefit from. And we think that that will also help bring more reviewers into the overall reviewer pool as they see the real benefit of participating. And it is not just about publications and citations. We need to actively seek out reviewers from emerging regions. And I think that goes the other way as well. Emerging regions need to seek out reviewers internationally as well and be supported in doing so by their peers overseas. The rise of China is very striking. Won't spend too much time on that, but as I say, the report is free. I think you might find some really interesting statistics there on what China's up to. It's getting harder to get review done. The demand for peer review is increasing, but proportionate actually to reviewers becoming less responsive, which is a real challenge. And again, incentives really do matter. It's very important to engage with your reviewers, not take them for granted, understand why they're reviewing, what they want to get out of it. For example, you might find there's a way of encouraging early career researchers to review your articles with the support of a senior researcher to help them learn about how to submit a good article to your journal and to other journals. And that might be a way of bringing in reviewers into your community, as well as giving something back for what is ultimately always free work. So yeah, I think I just leave you with that question. What percentage of your researcher experience strategy addresses reviewers? By that I mean that many editors think primarily about how I can bring in authors, how I can bring in content with high citation potential, but we would ask that you are mindful of your reviewers. Your reviewers are ultimately also your authors, also your readers. They can speak a lot for your journal to others, they can raise your profile, so it's very important to think about what of your strategy addresses their needs and their requirements. Thank you very much.
Yes, question and answer session. Okay.